Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're tackling a really interesting puzzle.
Yeah.
Why is it that in heterosexual encounters, men consistently report having more orgasms than women?
The orgasm gap.
Exactly. And the numbers, they're pretty stark. There was this Sex in Canada survey. It found 86% of cisgender men said they orgasmed in their last heterosexual experience.
86%.
But only 62% of cisgender women. That's a big difference.
It is. And what's fascinating, or maybe frustrating, is how we often hear these stats explained away,
How so?
Like, oh, women are just more complex, or maybe they don't care as much about orgasm. Those kinds of ideas.
Right, the sort of individual level explanations, takes them longer, harder to please,
Okay.
that kind of stuff.
Exactly. They focus on the individual, maybe biology.
Yeah, and that's what we really want to dig into today. Because, well, we're not so sure those old explanations really hold up.
Okay.
We've got a recent study actually building on that same Sex in Canada project. Researchers Nicole Ondrashek, Tina Fettner, and Melanie Heath.
All right. I've seen their work.
And their work suggests something much bigger is going on, that this gap, it isn't just about bodies. It's deeply tied to our social world, our norms.
So more social than biological.
That's the angle. So our mission today is really to unpack their findings and see how these, societal forces might be shaping even our most intimate moments.
Okay. So this study, it took that national survey data and really questioned those assumptions, didn't it? About women's ability and, crucially, their desire to orgasm.
Absolutely. They didn't just assume women don't want it or can't have it.
So what jumped out first from their analysis?
Well, here's a real eye-opener. They found that when oral sex was part of the encounter, the orgasm gap got significantly smaller in their sample.
Wow. Okay. So just including that act made a big difference.
It did, which immediately tells you something, right, about what's often missing, direct clitoral stimulation.
Absolutely. And that's where it gets really intriguing because we know this scientifically. We know clitoral stimulation is, for many women, the key.
Right. So the puzzle is, if we know this, why does the gap persist? Why isn't it standard practice if it works?
Exactly. And that's why the researchers didn't just stop at the survey numbers. They did these in-depth interviews too, right? With men and women across Canada.
Yeah, to get at the why behind the numbers, to understand the beliefs.
And those interviews started to uncover some really powerful, ingrained ideas. They talked about gender essentialism.
Okay, let's unpack that term a bit. Gender essentialism.
It's basically this belief, right, that men and women are just naturally fundamentally different, like biologically wired for different things.
So the stereotype is, men inherently need physical release. Maybe sex is more physical for them.
While women inherently seek emotional connection. That's the classic essentialist line.
And you can see how that thinking, even if unintentional, could sideline female orgasm, couldn't it? If it's seen as purely physical and women need emotion.
Precisely. It sets up this false dichotomy. And the study connects this to broader patterns. These same essentialist beliefs have historically justified, separate spheres.
Like women in the home, men in the workforce.
Exactly. The researchers suggest that same logic gets applied, maybe unconsciously, to sex. It frames a woman's desire for, say, emotional closeness as somehow separate from, or maybe even conflicting with, her physical pleasure or orgasm.
Which sounds completely counterintuitive when you say it out loud.
Right. But the research suggests these norms are powerful.
So let's be really clear then. This research isn't saying women don't desire orgasm or can't achieve it.
Not at all.
It's saying these beliefs about gender, these norms, create expectations that limit the focus on women's pleasure. It challenges that idea that women's orgasms are just too complicated or extra work.
Yeah, it reframes it. The problem isn't the woman's body or desire. It's the restrictive social script for heterosexual sex.
Okay, so gender essentialism is one piece. What else did they find?
Well, connected to that is this idea of heteronormativity.
Ah, okay. How does that play in?
The participants, when asked about regular sex, overwhelmingly defined it as penile-vaginal intercourse, PVI.
Right. That's seen as the default, the main event.
Exactly. And heteronormativity, in this context, is that assumption that heterosexual sex is PVI, centered on the penis, and that's the normal way.
And the implication is?
The implication is that anything else, like oral sex for the woman, even if it's highly effective for her orgasm,
gets treated as secondary.
Yeah. It gets framed as alternative or extra, maybe foreplay, but not the core act itself. The interviews showed people calling these other practices time-consuming or challenging.
So it's like there's a script for regular sex, and that script doesn't automatically prioritize ensuring the woman orgasms through, say, clitoral focus.
That seems to be what the data suggests. It marginalizes practices that are crucial for closing that gap.
And didn't the interviews also uncover some, well, more troubling feelings some women had?
Yes, that was another really striking part. Some women actually reported negative feelings associated with the very acts that could lead to their orgasm, especially oral sex.
Like that quote they included from Kathy.
Exactly. She said, "I don't do oral sex. It can be very pleasurable, but it feels wrong. It just makes me feel dirty."
Wow. Feels wrong, makes me feel dirty, even while acknowledging the pleasure.
It really highlights the power of these social messages, doesn't it? How they can get internalized.
It speaks volumes about the sexual double standard, too. That lingering idea that women's sexuality is somehow suspect or that they should police their own desires.
Precisely. Women are often judged more harshly, taught to self-regulate, to not appear too sexual. So embracing a practice like receiving oral sex, even if pleasurable, might clash with those deeply ingrained good girl messages.
There's this toxic mix then. You've got beliefs about women's bodies and desires.
Combined with this narrow, heteronormative definition of what sex even is.
And maybe even internalized shame or discomfort from the woman herself about certain pleasurable acts.
And together, that whole system kind of works to justify or at least perpetuate the orgasm gap. It makes it seem almost natural or inevitable rather than social.
Yeah, it masks the underlying inequality.
And the researchers make this really important point. We have challenged gender essentialism in other areas, right? Like work, education.
Sure, there's been progress, definitely.
But somehow in the realm of heterosexual sex, these old beliefs seem incredibly sticky. They still hold a lot of sway.
So the orgasm gap isn't just a personal issue, it's actually a reflection of broader gender inequality playing out intimately.
That's the argument. It extends right into the bedroom.
It really makes you think about how much these background beliefs shape things we consider private or personal.
It does. Which raises a question for you, the listener, perhaps. If we accept this view that the orgasm gap is a form of gender inequality, not just biology, what does that reveal about how powerful these social norms really are? How deep do they run?
Okay, so to kind of wrap this up for you, this deep dive looking at the Sex and Canada study and the follow-up research, it really shifts the focus, doesn't it?
It does.
The orgasm gap. It seems less like some biological mystery and much more like a product of our social and cultural landscape.
Yeah, specifically these ideas of gender essentialism, men are like this, women are like that, and heteronormativity. This is what real sex is.
It really boils down to how we think about men, women, and what we even count as sex.
Which leads us to maybe a final thought for you to mull over.
Go on.
Just how deeply do these societal beliefs about gender and sex actually permeate our most private, intimate experiences? And if they run that deep, what would it actually take to challenge them? To reshape those norms, not just in theory, but in practice, to achieve, greater sexual equity for everyone involved?